Are people there concerned about what impact this could have on the election?
It's news made for your streaming world.
For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
I didn't know, was my child dead? Is my child passed out?
I just kept saying, please be okay, please be okay.
You rush your child to the hospital.
A woman came in, normal clothes. We get down the hallway, and she closes the door. They were accusing me of child abuse.
And that's when the real nightmare begins.
Hey, calm down.
No, it's my children. I can't calm down.
Do No Harm, a new podcast series from NBC News and Wondery. First 2 episodes available Tuesday. Subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts.
I wore my snowshoes.
Hashtag blessed on that one.
I am a purebred Mormon.
I'm Pentecostal.
It is a very big deal that I'm no longer Mormon.
I was is attainable. She's a bitch.
Go away.
Amen.
The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City premieres Wednesday at 10, only on Bravo. Set your DVR.
Joe Biden is moving back to Washington, and he has black voters to thank for that, particularly black voters in some key cities. 87% of black voters went for Biden. That's according to NBC News exit polling data. NBC News BLK reporter Janelle Ross joins me now. Janelle, we're talking about cities like Philadelphia, Detroit, Milwaukee, Atlanta. Tell us about what happened in these cities and how they really helped Joe Biden win here.
Well, I think many people know the story themselves because they watched it happen, right?
Yeah.
We saw the election map remain rather undetermined. Wisconsin, Michigan, for example, Georgia, there are some questions that remain, but as the vote continued to come in, as counting continued, as the vote totals from major cities began to come in, the map was determined. And that comes down to a couple of major cities, truly Detroit, where about 80%, almost 80% of residents are black, and something like 94% of people who voted for Joe Biden. There's a similar, but certainly there are large black populations. Milwaukee, almost 40% of that city is black, and Milwaukee delivered those votes for Joe Biden. Similar story in Atlanta, as many people know. That city is 51% black. And certainly there are similar stories in multiple cities.
A surge of mail-in ballots turned election day into election week. Even though it took a while, the counting process was pretty normal. NBC News' Tom Costello shows us how the votes came in accurately and fraud-free.
Hey, Allison, good day to you. So as you know, despite these baseless claims of voter fraud on social media, right-wing social media for the most part, election officials and elected officials, including many Republicans, say the system worked as it was supposed to, and there simply is little to no evidence of fraud. Across America, patience was put to the test in the days following the election.
And that it won't take long.
Election workers making sure to count every ballot has proven to be secure.
There is no evidence of any kind of voter fraud in this election. The results were tabulated honestly.
The American public.
Former Republican Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff points to the results as proof of no manipulation.
If you look at the fact that there was apparently a fair amount of ticket splitting, where people voted for Joe Biden for president, but then may have voted for a Republican for the House or for the Senate, that reinforces the idea that there was no fraud.
Republicans, in fact, did better than expected in the election, defying the polls to pick up seats in the House of Representatives. The fate of the Senate majority now coming down to 2 runoff elections in Georgia.
Thank you very much.
President Trump pushes that many experts anticipated before Election Day. In Pennsylvania, where officials could not start counting the more than 2.6 million mail-in ballots until first, President Trump led Joe Biden by more than 696,000 first on Friday morning by just 5,500 votes. He's since expanded his lead to more than 43,000. In Ohio, where absentee ballots were the first to be counted, it was a blue mirage.
Biden had the early lead. Well, the Republican vote is starting to come in. As you can see, the county map's getting redder.
Biden was in the lead by more than 266,000 votes, or 7,000 votes. The president now has a 460,000 vote lead. A lot of eyes were also on the battleground state of Florida.
We've got a big call to make. It's official now. NBC projects Florida goes to President Donald Trump.
The results came in quickly since officials were allowed to count mail-in ballots weeks before. But in other battlegrounds, the counting is not over. Pennsylvania can count mail-in ballots received up to 3 days after the election day. It's 7 days process to pick the leader of the country, working as designed.
Hey everyone, I'm Allison Morris. You are watching NBC News Now. Hope everybody got through the weekend. Election week is now behind us. Joe Biden is now a few races that are too close to call. We are waiting for final results from Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, and Alaska. Meanwhile, the GOP says it's going to fight the results in some key states that Biden won, particularly Pennsylvania. Several Republican attorneys general asking the Supreme Court to step in and stop PA from counting ballots received after Election Day. But that is not stopping Joe Biden from moving forward with his transition plans. The president-elect announcing a COVID advisory board today. There have been nearly 600. We will have an update on the rising number of COVID-19 cases a little later in this hour. The presidential race still too close to call in Georgia. The Trump campaign focusing in on the Peach State, not just for its results in the presidential election, but also for the Senate races that could decide the balance of power in that chamber. Here's what senior advisor to the Trump campaign, Jason Miller, said earlier today on Fox Business.
We believe that in this recount scenario, as we go through this process, that we have identified thousands of places where these ballots will get thrown out. This isn't even just about the president speaking to Georgia. We also need to do this to make sure the integrity of the election is secure for these Senate races coming up in Georgia as well.
NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander joining us now from Atlanta. Blaine, the Trump campaign announcing that Rep. Doug Collins will lead their recount efforts in Georgia, stating that, quote, we are concerned about the lack of transparency in the tabulation process, especially given the reports.
Well, Allison, what we're seeing right now is this kind of increasingly nasty back and forth between some different factions of the Republican Party here in the state of Georgia. And it kind of centers around the Secretary of State's office and what's been going on with the election. So I think the first thing to say, most notably, is that all of those Republicans who are criticizing right now the way the election has been handled in Georgia have done so without providing any evidence of any voter fraud or irregularities in Georgia's election. So what we saw just recently was a joint statement, a rather scathing joint statement from Georgia's 2 Republican senators, both of whom are locked in separate but close re-election battles and will likely be going to runoffs in January. So let me read you a little bit of that statement from Senators Loeffler and Perdue. They're calling on the Secretary of State to step down. The Secretary of State, who happens to be a Republican as well, they're saying, we believe that when there are failures, they need to be called out, even when it's in your own party. The Secretary of State has failed to deliver honest and transparent elections. He has failed the people of Georgia and should step down immediately. And again, from the Secretary of State, which was almost equally as scathing, making it clear that he was not going to step down, and then adding that he, as a Republican, is focused on Republicans maintaining control of the Senate. And he said that he suggests the 2 senators do so as well. Now, beyond that back and forth, one thing that we've heard from the voter implementation manager here in Georgia, the lieutenant governor, and the Secretary of State's office is that their office has found no evidence of any widespread voter irregularities. Here's a little bit from the Secretary of State's office earlier today. Take a look.
as we see people who are genuinely upset with the outcomes, people who are genuinely thrilled with the outcomes. The facts are the facts, regardless of outcomes. And that's one of the things we're focusing on here, is getting our count accurate and right, giving accurate information, so that at the end of the day, everybody, regardless of whose side won and whose side lost, understands that in Georgia, we have...
Now, that was Gabe Sterling, the state's voter implementation manager, and he also mentioned that, yes, there will be a recount. They say that they're confident that everything was done properly. Now, they've said in their office, were there illegal votes? Yes, they do believe that there were some in there, but again, made it very clear that none of them rose or would rise to the level that it would change the outcomes here in Georgia. And he also stated that he believes a recount, which is almost certain to happen, will not result in any different results. Allison.
Blaine, we know we could see both Senate races in Georgia head to runoffs on January 5th, I believe. Stacey Abrams' voting rights group Fair Fight says they have raised more than $7 million for those elections. That's a lot of cash for these two races. What are they doing with that money, and how are those candidates preparing?
Well, they're already hitting the ground running, Allison. You know, it's very clear that, you know, people in Georgia are paying attention, but this has national implications, of course, because it's these two races here in Georgia that are very likely going to decide the balance of power in the Senate. So that's why you're seeing so many big names, big dollars already flooding into Georgia on both the Republican and the Democratic side. So on the Democrats, you know, when I've spoken with leaders here in the state, Democratic leaders here in the state, they're optimistic that the election of Joe Biden, the fact that he's now president-elect,